Hi, welcome to Chapter 7, Section 2 here. We're doing the Road to Revolution. This section is the Townshend tea tax and the Boston Massacre, all the way through to the Intolerable Acts. So the last time the British have a massive debt from the French and Indian War, they are taxing America directly with the Stamp Act, which causes Americans to absolutely freak out and behave like small children, to the point that the tax couldn't even be enforced or collected here in America. They intimidated people so bad. Parliament, just a year later, repealed the tax but issued the Declaratory Act, which said that you win, America, but we can tax you whenever we want. So that debt, that £140 million debt or $280 million debt, was not going away. So in 1767, the Townshend Act was passed. Charles Townshend was in charge of Parliament. That's why they called it this. It was a light import tax on glass, white lead, paper, paint, and tea. It wasn't a direct tax, it's a tariff. But at this point, Americans are suspicious because of republicanism and radical Whigs that any encroachment on liberty had to be stopped, or it's going to basically lead to an absolute tyranny. So Americans were not too cool with it, especially since Americans had to import their goods. They weren't allowed to produce them because of the Navigation Acts. They also didn't have enough capital to start their own factories here. So, it did upset a lot, but it's not a tax on everyone. Revenues from this were used to pay the royal governors. And so one of the tricks the colonists used before was to get what they wanted. They refused to pay the governors until the governors gave in, because otherwise they don't get a paycheck. Americans were pretty quiet about this whole thing until the Massachusetts circular letter was suppressed by Lord Hillsborough, who was the Secretary of State for America. And in this, it was written by Samuel Adams and James Otis. And all it did was it urged all Americans to work together against Parliament, to basically kind of unite them. And Adams and Otis are two radical Americans who were very opposed to anything Britain did. They're never happy. And so when this was suppressed by Lord Hillsborough, Americans saw this as another incremental step towards taking away liberty. He had his governors dissolve the Massachusetts Assembly and ordered other colonies to withdraw their support for the letter. And just like any book or movie that is told that it's naughty and banned, people want to see it. When this royal governor or secretary of state said you need to withdraw your support for this, you need to not read it, naturally people read it and they published it everywhere, and it drummed up more and more support, which led to outrage over the Townshend Acts. The New York legislature was suspended for not enforcing the Quartering Act. And once again, Americans went back to their rebellious ways by boycotting and tarring and feathering and non-importation agreements and all that good stuff. And they had evidence here that they're suppressing the mail. They are telling Americans what to do. They are dissolving assemblies in New York and Massachusetts. So they're taking away the fundamental right for the people to rule themselves. The British saw it as a measure to keep peace and to keep this rebellion from growing. So, in 1768, John Hancock's smuggling ship, remember he's the number one smuggler in America, or one of the top ones, the Liberty was seized in 1768. Boston at this point is on the brink of rebellion. You have the Redcoats stationed there. Boston's kind of the troublemaker of the Americans. And you have, like I said, the Redcoats are stationed there. You have the Quartering Act. You have the Massachusetts Assembly suspended. And the troops are not behaving well. They're stealing stuff and being kind of brutish and bullyish. And so the Bostonians are just not happy. British landed 2 regiments of troops in the colonies in 1768 to add to those 10,000. The Redcoats, who were actually a lot of Irish soldiers, were sent in. To insult them, they were called lobsterbacks, because lobster, believe it or not, was for poor people back then. Only poor homeless people ate lobster. I mean, no self-respecting person would ever eat lobster. Ew. Probably the first person to ever eat it was on a dare. Dude, I dare you to eat that sea bug. Bostonians felt that this was a violation of their rights. The troops acted rude, they stole, And on March 5th, 1770, the townspeople, they were kind of whipped up into shape. They were irritated. Began throwing stuff at the troops: stones, snowballs, oyster shells, wood. I don't know if you out there have any advice for life, but I have some for you. Don't throw stuff at people with guns. It just doesn't turn out well. Even if it's just a snowball. We're just having a fight. It's not like Frozen. Do you want to build a snowman or whatever that is? Do you want to throw some snowballs? Actually, no. Would shoot you. The Redcoats fired, killing 5. For some reason, the book says 11, which I'm curious. The book here, The American Pageant. Never seen 11 in all the resources I've read. It's always been 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Including Crispus Attucks, who was African American. And so this has been deemed the Boston Massacre. 5. When you hear the word Boston Massacre, it makes you think like hundreds. You don't have a picture of the 1978 Boston Massacre, where the Red Sox were swept by the Yankees, unfortunately, because the Yankees are the evil empire. In a 4-game series, and they lost a big lead, and then it led to Bucky freaking Dent and all that stuff. That's sports history. But the Boston Massacre was called that as a propaganda method. It was a way for people to say, hey, did you hear what happened in Boston? There was a massacre. There was like 10 people killed. And then the next time, there was a massacre in Boston. There was like 35 people killed. By the time it reached Virginia, the news is, oh my goodness, the British killed 1,000 people in Boston. We need to do something. So you have these engravings here. The one on the left is the one that you see here is a very famous engraving by Paul Revere. The same Paul Revere from the Beastie Boys song and some other stuff too, which shows the Brits firing into it, and you have blood spilled and all this stuff, and that looks awful. That is like a massacre, except for this one little dog just chill. He's like, hey, what's going on? Somebody gonna feed me? And then you have another version, which kind of puts Crispus Attucks in the middle of it, and shows the sacrifice of the African American that was killed there. This one doesn't. It's a little more detailed, a little better art. Sorry, Paul Revere, you're not as good an artist as this person. And it shows the colonists fighting back as well, which is a little different perspective. The previous one is a little more effective for getting people to your cause. This one might be a little more accurate. This is outside the State House here in Boston, where they read annually the Declaration of Independence, kind of in the same area. In the crowd of people here, this was on the 4th of July here in Boston back in 2007. The actual marker is there for the Boston Massacre. So here's some of the other places going on. Faneuil Hall was a meeting place that a lot of the Sons of Liberties, their meetings kind of drummed up, and really kind of caused some problems with the Americans. Got people a little bit drunk and said, let's go rebel. There's the inside of it, and here's another engraving of Paul Revere's Boston Massacre. So here's actually they had to move this marking on the street several times in Boston. The exact location actually isn't quite where it was. They've moved it to kind of fit the changing streets and everything. And then you have a headstone that commemorates the 5 that were killed. Colonial leaders used this incident as propaganda. The information is designed to influence opinion. The Sons of Liberty held vigils and anniversary marches every year on March 5th to commemorate the dead that were killed needlessly by the British, by this tyrannical power that was taking away liberty and freedom and rights from Americans. Paul Revere made the very famous engraving, and Bostonians started calling for stronger boycotts. It led to more action. John Adams, the cousin of Samuel Adams, the guy who eventually became the first vice president and the second president, is actually the guy who defended the troops. He was not a patriot to start, John Adams, even though his cousin was pretty fiery and rebellious. John Adams was a man of law, and he defended the troops, which is a little known fact. If you've ever seen the miniseries John Adams on HBO, starring Paul Giamatti, it really kind of shows that really well. Only 2 of the troops were convicted of manslaughter. They didn't go to the gallows, and so John Adams proved he was a competent lawyer. And we'll examine here in a little bit what made John Adams shift from being a man of law to a patriot or a rebel, whatever side you're on. So Lord North, the new Prime Minister of Britain, persuaded Parliament to repeal the Townshend Acts. After the bloodshed at Boston, they kind of went, "Ooh, maybe we went a little too far. Let's take a step back. We don't need a full-fledged war right here in America. Let's calm them down." Um, the income of the Townshend Acts was £295. That's how effective the American boycotts and intimidation of against the tax collectors was. They spent £170,000 in military costs. So cost-wise, they're losing money on trying to tax America. They did keep a small tax on tea, which was hated by most of the colonists. And in 1772, Samuel Adams revived something that was very important. One of his lasting contributions to the Revolution was the Committee of Correspondence. And this is a letter writing campaign and mailing campaign to circulate anti-British writings to get stimulation towards this rebellion, towards this revolution. Americans were able to read and write at a much higher rate than the rest of the world. Education was more valued here, it was more prevalent, and so these writings influenced commoners, normal people, to join the cause. Because rebellions aren't just from leaders. They're not just Sam Adams and John Adams and Jefferson and Washington and Hancock and Franklin. You need men. And they had to convince these people, and through the newspapers and through letters and through town hall meetings and through drinking in the pub and even through church, people were influenced by these writings. And so this was just Sam Adams, but it's a whole network of writers that circulated anti-British writings to drum up pro-American feelings. These committees were created by the American colonies in order to maintain communication with each other, keep each other abreast of what's going on in colony to colony, to allow awareness of different violations of rights going on. In March of 1773, the Virginia House of Burgesses, the lower house of the colony of Virginia, proposed that each colonial legislature appoint a standing committee for intercolonial correspondence. That's a mouthful. Within just a year, nearly all the colonies had joined. So Virginia kind of jumped on board and said, we need an official committee to basically talk between the colonies. And this kind of got the communication open between Adams and between the legislative bodies, so they could work together. And Sam Adams here pointing to his committees of correspondence. That's his lasting influence, not beer. The Boston Brewing Company just named their beer after him. Yes, he was a brewer, but if you buy a Sam Adams, you're not drinking his beer. Just named after him, okay? Get that out of your head. Every year, high school kids, dude, is that like the beer? Whatever. Tea brewing in Boston. Oh, a spot of tea. The Tea Act of 1773 was passed to help the fledgling East India Company. This was a company that was on the brink of bankruptcy, and so Britain, to help them out, gave them exclusive rights to trade tea directly to the colonies. This tea was going to be cheaper for Americans. It was going to be lower in cost significantly. Yeah, there's a small tax, but they're trying to help the East India Company. They would ship the tea directly to the colonies, cutting out the middleman. And it says, without paying taxes, but it cut out the middleman, which were American shippers and American smugglers. And they would bypass these colonial merchants. And the people in charge, like Samuel Adams and John Hancock, they make money smuggling, and so this hurts their bottom line. It actually lowered the price of tea, and mind you that before the American Revolution, we were a nation of tea drinkers. We shifted to coffee because we wanted to do everything anti-British, and so anything British was seen bad during the American Revolution. Instead of tea, we drink coffee. Instead of rum, we start drinking whiskey or bourbon. Instead of not brushing our teeth, we brush our teeth and floss. Maybe that one's a little too far and cliche and stereotypical of the British. Sorry, British people. In all colonial ports, except Boston, they forced all these ships from the East India Company to return. Or they seized the sea, or seized the tea, or they burned the ships. Boston, because they landed on a Sunday, they weren't able to do anything because law forbade them from working on Sunday. Remember, Boston was founded by Puritans. They had very strict blue laws back then. Ben Franklin then leaked a letter from Hutchinson and Oliver. These are two British royally appointed officials. That basically convinced people that there was a conspiracy to rid Americans of their rights. He leaked it. He got a hold of it. Franklin was always a little bit wheeling and dealing behind the scenes. He released this, it was published in newspapers, and it was this event here that led John Adams to switch sides, to say, I am not going to be a lawyer anymore. I'm not going to defend the rule of law. I'm going to be a patriot, because now this conspiracy was revealed, that there was indeed this radical Whig idea that they were trying to take away liberty from America. Then, fatefully, on December 16, 1773, a group of men, the Sons of Liberty, dressed as Mohawk Indians, which always makes me mad. It wasn't us, it was the Indians. Threw 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Chest. You make a spot of tea, you got a tea bag like this. It's chest. Huge. Big. Lots of tea. It was 90,000 pounds of tea. That's 45 tons. That's a ton of tea. Which was worth nearly 10,000 pounds in their money. To compare it to modern prices, that's $1.7 million worth of tea. I don't know if they threw in lemon and sugar and everything and made a spot of tea in Boston Harbor. But this is a very famous event people know as the Boston Tea Party. The reason they had to do this is because the ship sat there for weeks, because it landed on Sunday. Nobody would unload it, and they had a deadline. There was a deadline that had to be met. That basically, if the ship wasn't unloaded, there was a big consequences to be paid. And it had to be unloaded on December 17th. So instead of unloading it, legally, they dumped it in the harbor. These men were celebrated as heroes in Boston. Everyone knew what was kind of going on. It was a planned event ahead of time. Sam Adams gave this signal, and it was kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, whatever. And they, carried out this plan. It wasn't done in secret like many paintings have shown. It wasn't done under the cover of darkness. People knew what was going on. Here's some paintings of the Boston Tea Party, dumping it, and you have crowds watching it. You have people cheering it on, and them dressed as Native Americans. They're cheering them on. Why are they dressed as natives? And this has been depicted over and over again. 342 chests of tea, $1.7 million. That's a little bit of, consumer terrorism going on there. A little review of what's going on. You have the Sugar Act, the Quartering Act, the Stamp Act. Stamp Act is repealed. You get the Declaratory Act, the Townshend Act. They repealed that after the Boston Massacre. Sam Adams revives the committees of correspondence, and then the Boston Tea Party. So, at this point, you have a kid throwing a fit in America, rebellion, and so it's time to punish the Bostonians. And so Parliament passes the Coercive Acts, which here in America we call the Intolerable Acts, because they're so intolerable. Britain punished America. They ruled with a heavy hand here. King George III, pictured here, in the painting, was outraged by the lack of I can't think of the word, following rules right now. The impunity that we had, and so he was outraged. Boston Harbor was closed until the tea was paid back. At 9,659 pounds. Which is a lot of money. They're going to close it. No ships can go in or out. They can't get supplies. The town was put under martial law, which means the military is in charge. There are no town meetings. There are no colonial assemblies meeting. Town meetings were banned all in New England, and they forced colonists to quarter redcoats in private homes, going a step further with that Quartering Act, not just in lodges and inns, now in private homes. And not only that, but provide beer, food, wine, candles, firewood, you name it. Basically, the goal of the British is to isolate Boston. Kind of like a teacher sometimes will scream at one kid and get the whole class to, calm down. This is what they do. Boston, will you knock it off? Oh, I'm so sick of you, Boston. Hopefully that New York and Philadelphia go, dude, you see what happened to Boston? God, that's just not me. Whew. But it backfires on the British. Instead of, everyone backing away from the British or from Boston, the rest of the colonies rally to Boston's aid. Parliament hoped to isolate Boston. The colonies, though, pitched in and helped. And then they went one step further and passed the Quebec Act, which allowed Catholic French to live freely and expanded its borders into Ohio, which the Americans weren't allowed to, because I don't know why. Oh, yeah, the Proclamation of 1763. You're going to let those Catholics? We don't like Catholics. Come on. And it really just kind of a thorn in America's side. And this all started with them saying Americans couldn't go west of the Appalachians. Now you're punishing Boston. You have tax after tax. There's a conspiracy with the Hutchinson's Oliver letters. And now to top it all off, the cherry on top of this is you're going to let Catholics move into Ohio, and you won't let Americans, the people that fought for you, that helped you win the French and Indian War, that sacrificed, that 20,000 served, you're not going to let them go to it. It's on now, Britain. So here's a map of the Quebec there. You can see that they were allowed to settle in the areas that basically the Americans wanted. They did create an Indian reserve too, which outraged Americans. And so our country in 1774, the brink of rebellion. So next time we're going to learn about bloodshed and how we get to the actual fighting at the American Revolution. If you have any questions or comments, put it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this. Tune in next time. Thank you.